Before this story really starts, take 1 second. Hit like, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because this story isn't just something you watch. It's something that follows you after the screen goes dark. Now, this didn't begin with luck. It didn't begin with courage. It began with exhaustion. Evan Calder was 28 years old and so tired he could feel it in his teeth. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, the kind that comes from years of doing everything right and still ending up nowhere. He'd dropped out of college halfway through his sophomore year when his father collapsed in the break room of a feed supply warehouse and never stood back up. A heart attack at 53. No savings. No insurance worth mentioning. Just invoices that arrived weekly like accusations. Evan stayed. Someone had to. 8 years later, he was still drifting across eastern Oregon, working as hired muscle on ranches that paid him in cash, calluses, and silence. He slept in bunkhouses that smelled like wet denim and old coffee, ate whatever didn't cost much, and filled the hole. Learned not to plan too far ahead. Dreams are dangerous when you can't afford them. By the time he walked into the Malheur County Annex building that Tuesday afternoon, Evan didn't believe in winning anymore. He believed in owning something small that couldn't be taken. The auction room looked like it had given up before he arrived. Folding chairs, scuffed floors, a handful of men who already owned too much pretending to be interested in owning more. Evan took a seat in the back. The auctioneer moved fast through the good land, pastures with water, properties with road access, places that smelled like money. Bids jumped effortlessly. Then the room changed. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Next parcel, lot 62. He paused. 258 acres, high desert, southeast corner of the county. No improvements, no water rights, no utilities, no maintained access. Another pause. Back taxes only. Starting bid, $25. Someone laughed. A short, sharp sound, like a bark. $25. Evan didn't think. Thinking would have talked him out of it. His hand went up. The auctioneer blinked, surprised. I've got 25. Do I hear 30? No one moved. Men turned. Looked Evan over like he was a bad joke. Going once. Evan felt his pulse in his neck. Going twice. The gavel fell. Sold. The sound echoed longer than it should have. 15 minutes later, Evan stood at the clerk's counter holding a deed and exactly $17 and some change. The clerk studied him with open concern. That land hasn't had anyone on it since the early 90s, she said. Last owner died alone. His kids refused it. Nobody wanted it even when it was free. Evan folded the deed carefully. I'm good with a loan, he said. She slid him a photocopied map. No roads, she added. You'll have to cross federal land to get close. Even then, it's rough. Evan nodded. He didn't say what he was thinking. Rough is familiar. The drive took the entire day. Highway turned to gravel. Gravel turned to dirt. Dirt turned to tire tracks that barely remembered being used. The landscape didn't feel empty. It felt indifferent. Sagebrush stretched to the horizon like it was trying to erase everything else. Volcanic rock rose in jagged lines, black against a washed-out sky. The wind never stopped moving, never rested long enough to be noticed. By late afternoon, Evan's GPS stopped arguing with itself. He was there. Nothing marked the boundary. No fence. No sign. No scar on the land to prove a person had ever tried to tame it. Evan stepped out of his truck and listened. The silence pressed back. This wasn't peaceful quiet. This was the quiet of a place that didn't care if you stayed or disappeared. He made camp where the ground flattened near a low ridge, built a small fire, heated canned beans, ate slowly, watching the sun sink behind rock formations that looked like broken teeth. When the stars came out, they came out hard. The Milky Way cut across the sky like a wound that never healed. Evan lay back in his sleeping bag and stared until his eyes burned. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar stretch inside his chest. Possibility. The sound woke him just before dawn. Not light. Not quick. Heavy. Evan's hand found the rifle before he sat up. The sound came again, closer. He clicked on the flashlight. The beam swept across sagebrush, rocks, then stopped. A horse stood at the edge of the light. It looked unreal, like something the desert had coughed up by mistake. Its ribs showed through skin pulled tight as wire. Its coat was dirt-stained and dull, patchy in places where scars had claimed it. One foreleg shook so badly, Evan thought it might fold. The horse didn't bolt. It just stood there, swaying. Evan lowered the rifle. "Easy," he said softly. The horse took a step forward, then another, like it was moving on memory alone. Up close, Evan saw everything. Cracked hooves, old wounds, fresh infection seeping dark against pale hair. This animal wasn't lost. It was finished. Evan swallowed hard. He poured water into his cooking pot and held it out. The horse drank like it was afraid the water might vanish. Its entire body trembled with effort. Again. Again. When it finally stopped, it lifted its head and looked straight at Evan. There was no panic there. There was intent. Like the horse had come to a conclusion long before Evan ever arrived. Evan exhaled. "All right," he murmured. "You found me." He named the horse Cinder, because it looked like something pulled from ashes that refused to cool. Getting Cinder to town took most of the morning. Evan drove slow, stopping often, supporting more weight than a truck bed was ever meant to hold. Cinder never fought him, never tried to flee. By the time the Burns Veterinary Clinic opened, Evan's hands were shaking. Dr. Lila Moreno took one look and went rigid. "This horse should be dead," she said flatly. She worked fast. Before, antibiotics, cleaning wounds that made Evan look away. "How long has he been like this?" she asked. "I don't know," Evan said. "He walked out of the desert." Dr. Moreno paused, looked at him. Then he picked the right place to stop. The estimate came later. Thousands. Evan didn't have hundreds. "I'll work," he said. "Clean, lift, anything." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you walk away," she said, "he dies." "I won't," Evan said. Cinder recovered faster than anyone expected. As weight returned, something else emerged. Balance, awareness, a stillness that didn't come from training alone. Old ranchers noticed. So did the silence when Evan said where he found him. One night, a farrier finally spoke. "That horse looks like Red Ash's bloodline." Evan frowned. "That stallion disappeared." The farrier nodded. "Exactly." The man arrived wearing clean boots and a smile that never reached his eyes. "My name is Howard Pike," he said. "That horse belongs to me." Dr. Moreno stepped forward. prove it. He couldn't, but he tried anyway. By nightfall, Evan was sleeping in his truck outside the clinic. Cinder stood inside, safe for now. And somewhere out there, a man who had lost something valuable had decided not to let it go quietly. Howard Pike didn't come back the next day. That alone told Evan Calder everything he needed to know. Men who are confident don't rush. Men who are cornered disappear long enough to sharpen their knives. Evan spent that night in his truck again, the clinic's fluorescent lights buzzing faintly through the walls. Every few hours he got out, walked to Cinder's stall, rested a hand against the horse's neck. Cinder leaned into it every time, not because he needed comfort, because he expected it. That expectation scared Evan more than anything else. The calls started on the third day. Ranchers Evan had worked for years ago, a former auction hand, an old woman who ran a feed store 2 counties over. Each conversation followed the same pattern. They asked where he found the horse. Evan answered. Silence followed. Finally, an older rancher named Dale Mercer said what the others wouldn't. You found him on that land? Yes. Dale exhaled slowly. That horse shouldn't exist anymore. The name buried in dust. Dale drove 3 hours the next morning, just to talk in person. He brought old paperwork in a weathered folder, breeding records, photographs, sale notices that never reached completion. He pointed to one name circled in red ink. Red Ash King. A stallion so valuable, he'd once been insured for more than most ranches were worth. He disappeared 15 years ago, Dale said. Official story was he died during transport. Unofficial story. Nobody ever believed it. Evan looked at the photo. Same eyes, same bone structure. Same faint white mark above the left nostril. Cinder wasn't just neglected. He was erased. Why Pike came too late. Howard Pike wasn't Red Ash King's owner. He was his handler. The man paid to move horses quietly, to sell bloodlines where paperwork asked too many questions. Pike's operation didn't slaughter horses. It used them up. Unregistered breeding. No oversight. No records. When a stallion stopped being profitable, it disappeared. And Cinder had disappeared too early, which meant Pike hadn't abandoned him willingly. He'd lost him. And now, Cinder had walked straight into daylight. The letter that changed everything. Dr. Moreno received the envelope first. No return address. Inside were photocopies of transport logs, breeding tallies, and veterinary invoices from a facility in northern Nevada that officially didn't exist. One invoice was circled. Bay Stallion. Shoulder injury. Non-reportable. Dated 3 months earlier. Cinder hadn't wandered the desert for years. He'd been dumped there recently. To die quietly. Legal ground that shifted. The hearing happened fast. Pike arrived with a lawyer who looked bored and irritated, like this was supposed to be easy. Evan arrived with a public legal aid attorney named Rachel Voss, who specialized in animal welfare cases and hated men like Pike with professional precision. Pike claimed ownership. Rachel asked for proof. He produced none. Rachel produced everything else. Photos of Cinder's condition. Veterinary testimony. Transport logs that didn't line up. Breeding records that vanished mid-sentence. This horse, Rachel said, is not property. He is evidence. The judge didn't hesitate. Custody remains with Mr. Calder, he said. This matter is being referred for criminal investigation. Howard Pike's face drained of color. He didn't look at Evan as he left. He looked afraid. Ownership didn't solve Evan's real problem. He still had nowhere to take Cinder. The desert land waited patiently, useless and unforgiving, until a man named Thomas Reed showed up unannounced. Reed was in his 60s, lean, quiet, the kind of man who watched before speaking. "I heard about your horse," Reed said, "and your land." Evan nodded. Reed smiled faintly. "There's water under it," he said. What the desert hid. Reed had spent decades studying underground aquifers. "That valley," he said, pointing to Evan's map, "is a natural basin. Old volcanic activity trapped water deep. Nobody drilled because nobody believed it was worth the cost. Drilling wasn't cheap, but Cinder was valuable now. Not as a commodity, as a partner. Reed proposed a deal. He'd finance the well. They'd split future operations. Cinder's bloodline would be protected. No abuse, no overuse. Evan agreed without hesitation. Some things weren't negotiable. Water, at 300 feet. The drill hit water just after sunrise. A rush so strong they had to back off before pressure blew the casing. The crew stared. Reed laughed. "Told you," he said. "The desert didn't bloom. It shifted." Grass followed. Fencing rose. A barn took shape like it had always belonged there. And Cinder. Cinder changed everything. The horse who remembered Cinder grew strong again. Not flashy. Solid. Ranchers came quietly at first, then openly. Stud contracts stacked up. Evan turned most of them down. This wasn't about money. This was about ending a line of cruelty, not restarting it. The end of the men who hid him. Howard Pike was charged 6 months later. Illegal sales, fraud, animal cruelty across state lines. The facility in Nevada was shut down. 37 horses were rescued. Some never recovered. Cinder had. Cinder lived to 32. When he died, Evan buried him on the highest ridge of the property. No fancy marker, just a flat stone. Cinder. He found his way back. Evan built a life there. Not a big one. A good one. The desert still stretches wide around the ranch. Still harsh. Still silent. But no longer empty. Because sometimes the land isn't worthless. It's just waiting for someone stubborn enough to stay. Cinder did not trust safety immediately. That was the thing Evan noticed first, once the urgency faded and routine took its place. Even after the ruling. Even after the threats stopped. Even after the desert property became something more than a joke on a county ledger. Cinder slept lightly. He would rest, but never fully surrender. One ear always angled toward the dark. Muscles coiled beneath the skin, like they were waiting for a reason to run. Dr. Moreno noticed it too. "That horse spent years learning that stillness was dangerous," she said one evening, leaning against the stall door. "Animals don't forget that." Evan nodded. He understood. Some nights, when the wind rattled the metal siding of the temporary barn, Evan felt it himself. That old instinct to stay half awake, listening for the sound of something going wrong. They were alike that way. So Evan made a rule. He never rushed Cinder. Not when leading him. Not when grooming. Not when training resumed. Every action was deliberate, predictable. Boring even. Trust, Evan learned, wasn't built through grand gestures. It was built through consistency. Morning feed at the same hour. Water checked twice. Hands steady. Voice low. Cinder began to change. Not dramatically, subtly. He stood longer at rest, let his head drop, closed his eyes for moments at a time. One afternoon, as Evan brushed dust from Cinder's flank, the horse exhaled deeply and leaned his weight just slightly into Evan's shoulder. It wasn't affection. It was surrender. Evan had to stop brushing for a moment. The land fought them. That was something Reed had warned Evan about early. The desert doesn't give up control easily, he'd said. The first well held. The second collapsed halfway down. A windstorm tore half the fencing loose one night and scattered posts across the basin like matchsticks. Coyotes tested the perimeter regularly. Once, a rattlesnake found its way into the barn, coiled near the feed bins like it belonged there. Evan killed it cleanly, then stood for a long time afterward, shovel resting against his shoulder, heart pounding harder than it should have. This place didn't forgive mistakes, but it didn't punish effort either. They learned, adjusted, improved. Grass took hold slowly. Hardy, stubborn species that didn't need pampering. Reed brought in soil amendments, truckload by truckload, teaching Evan what the land could support and what it never would. No point trying to turn this into something it isn't, Reed said. Work with it. Evan listened. Always. Word spread quietly at first. Horse people have a way of talking without broadcasting. Phone calls replaced emails. Conversations ended with long pauses instead of commitments. Then one rancher showed up in person. Then another. They came to see Cinder. Not because of the story. Not because of the scandal. Because when Cinder moved, even at a walk, there was something undeniable in the way he carried himself. Power without panic. Strength without noise. One older breeder watched him circle the paddock for nearly an hour before speaking. That horse doesn't waste motion, he said finally. You can't teach that. Evan laid out his rules clearly. Limited breedings, strict care standards, no transport to facilities he hadn't vetted personally. Some walked away. Enough stayed. The first stud fees paid for the next phase of fencing. The second paid off equipment loans. The third sat untouched in Evan's account for months because he didn't quite believe it yet. Howard Pike resurfaced once. Not in person. Through a message relayed by a mutual contact who thought he was being helpful. Pike wanted to talk. Evan declined. The contact pressed. Look, the man said. He's desperate. Everything collapsed after the investigation. He just wants closure. Evan stared out at the pasture where Cinder grazed, calm and solid in the evening light. He already got closure, Evan said. He just didn't like the shape of it. That was the end of it. Pike never reached out again. The storm came in fast. No warning. No gradual buildup. Just a wall of black clouds that swallowed the horizon and erased distance. Reed was gone that week. Crew, too. Evan was alone. The wind hit first, hard enough to rock the barn doors. Then rain, sharp and sideways, driven like gravel. The power generator sputtered. Evan checked it twice before the lights finally died. He grabbed a flashlight and ran for the barn. Cinder was already on his feet, alert, but not panicked. That mattered. A support beam failed 20 minutes into the storm. Wood cracked like a gunshot. Evan didn't think. He moved. Pulled Cinder back. Cut lead ropes. Opened the secondary stall. They stood together in the open shelter, while rain hammered the roof and thunder rolled so close, Evan felt it in his ribs. Cinder stayed. Didn't bolt. Didn't rear. Just stood. Pressed close enough that Evan could feel his heat through the rain-soaked jacket. When the storm finally moved on, half the fencing was gone, and one wall of the barn lay on the ground. Evan leaned against Cinder's shoulder and laughed once, a short, shaky sound. They'd passed another test. Together. Time smoothed things. The ranch grew, but not fast. Evan refused to expand beyond what he could oversee personally. Cinder sired fewer foals than he could have, but every one of them was sound, smart, even-tempered. Reed eventually retired to a smaller place downstate, stopping by a few times a year just to see what the land had become. "You did it right," he said once. "Most people don't." Evan didn't answer. He just watched Cinder move across the pasture, older now, but still unmistakable. Cinder began to age the way strong things do. Gradually. A stiffness in the mornings, a longer time rising from rest, a softness around the eyes that hadn't been there before. Dr. Moreno made the trip herself when Evan called. She examined Cinder carefully, then stepped back. "He's not in pain," she said, "but he's coming to the end of his working years." Evan nodded. "I know." They retired him that season. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a quiet shift. Cinder took to it easily, as if he'd been waiting. Cinder went down on a clear spring morning. No panic. No struggle. Evan found him lying on the ridge above the main pasture, breathing slow, eyes open. Evan sat with him, spoke quietly. Thanked him. When Cinder exhaled one last time, the desert was still. They buried him on that ridge, where the wind moved freely and the land stretched wide in every direction. Evan placed the stone himself. No dates, just a name. The ranch still stands, still modest, still quiet. The desert hasn't softened, but it has accepted them. Evan never became rich in the way people talk about. He became something better, grounded. Every year, when new foals take their first unsteady steps, Evan watches closely. Not for strength, for calm. Because strength fades, calm endures. And sometimes, in the right light, when the wind moves just so across the basin, Evan swears he sees a familiar shape standing at the edge of the pasture. Not a ghost, a memory that refuses to disappear. If you stayed until the end, you already understand what this story was really about. People eventually started driving past the ranch on purpose. Not often, not in crowds, but enough that Evan noticed. Dust trails would appear on the county road in the late afternoon, trucks slowing just a little too much, drivers craning their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the horse operation that had risen out of land everyone used to laugh at. Most never stopped. The ones who did usually found Evan fixing fence, mending a gate, or sitting on an overturned bucket sharpening tools. They asked the same questions. Is this the place? Is it true? Was he really that horse? Evan answered politely, briefly. Yes, yes, yes. Then he went back to work. Because what mattered wasn't what people saw from the road. It was what they didn't see. They didn't see the nights Evan woke to the sound of wind tearing at unfinished structures, wondering if he'd bet his life on a lie told by an old man with a map. They didn't see the mornings he counted feed bags twice, 3 times, doing math that only barely worked. They didn't see the weeks after Cinder's retirement, when the pasture felt wrong without the quiet gravity of him standing at its center. Success, Evan learned, looked calm from the outside. From the inside, it was constant adjustment. The foal was born early, too early. A cold snap had rolled through without warning, dragging the temperature down hard, just as the mare went into labor. Evan was in the barn within minutes. The foal hit the straw awkwardly, legs folding wrong, breath coming shallow and uneven. Its coat was damp and thin. Not ready for the world it had been forced into. Evan didn't think. He wrapped the foal, rubbed it, lifted it when its legs failed, called Dr. Moreno, even though he already knew the odds. She arrived an hour later, breath steaming, eyes sharp. "Heart's weak," she said. "Lungs underdeveloped." Evan stood there, hands raw, watching life flicker in a body barely prepared to hold it. The foal survived the night, then the next, then the one after that, slowly, stubbornly. Dr. Moreno shook her head on the 4th day. "That's his sire," she said quietly. "I've seen it before, that refusal." Evan named the foal Ember, not because he expected greatness, because survival mattered enough. Not everyone was happy about what Evan had built. There were whispers at auctions, comments about bloodlines, rescued by accident, suggestions that Evan had gotten lucky where others had failed through no fault of their own. Once, a man Evan barely knew approached him at a sale and said, "Funny how things work out for some people." Evan looked at him for a long moment, then said, "They don't." The man frowned, waiting for more. Nothing came. Evan had learned something important from Cinder. You didn't need to prove strength. You only needed to stand your ground. Time moved differently on the ranch, not slower, deeper. Each season didn't replace the last. It layered on top of it. Fence posts weathered. Barn wood darkened. Grass patterns shifted as Evan learned where the land held moisture longest. Children from neighboring towns began showing up in the summers, brought by parents who wanted them to learn what animals actually required. Evan taught them how to clean hooves, how to move calmly, how to notice when a horse wasn't quite right. "Pay attention," he told them. "That's the whole job." Some listened. Some didn't. The ones who did came back the next year. Evan was older when he realized it. Not old, just older than the man who had raised his hand at that auction without thinking. He stood one evening at the same ridge where Cinder was buried, watching the sun sink low and red across the basin. The wind moved through the grass, bending it in slow waves. For the first time, the desert didn't feel indifferent. It felt settled, not kind, but acknowledging. Evan stayed there until the light was gone. Then he walked back down toward the ranch, where horses shifted quietly in their pens, and the barn lights glowed warm against the dark. People still ask Evan why he bought that land, why he stopped for that horse, why he didn't sell when the money got good. He never gives the same answer twice, because the truth isn't simple. Sometimes a place saves a man. Sometimes an animal does. Sometimes they recognize something broken in each other and refuse to walk away. And sometimes, very rarely, the desert gives something back. If you made it this far, you didn't just watch a story. You stayed with it, like the video. Subscribe, and keep listening. There are more stories out there, quiet ones, hard ones, waiting for someone willing to tell them. Sometimes the land saves the man. Sometimes the animal does. Sometimes they save each other. Like, subscribe, stay. More stories are waiting.